very warm welcome to the second installment of this year's e-lounge session. Today, we pay homage to the late Professor Bongani Mayosi, a medical researcher born in the Eastern Cape and was the first African Black Dean of the University of Cape Town's Cardiology Department until his passing in 2018. Described by many as an African leader who served beyond himself, Dr. Mayosi's leadership has inspired many in the academic field. Doctor of Hearts is a biography authored by Dr. Judy Dlamini and Kopano Matlwa to take us through the lives and times of Professor Mayosi. His accolades include the National Order of Mapungubwe, the Platinum Award from the South African Medical Research Council, and the BHP Billiton Award from the National Science and Technology Foundation. Dubbed the Madiba of Medicine, Professor Mayosi has published over 350 peer-reviewed articles. As Professor of Cardiology and Dean, part of his transformative agenda was to create 1,000 PhDs in 10 years in South Africa. The e-lounge is one of our knowledge share platforms. We do hope that you will tune in and take away this knowledge. And remember that those who deserve to lead should read.
The prolific anthropologist turned artist, Johnny Clegg, the White Zulu, sings with the band Savuga. The world is full of strange behavior. Every man has to be his own savior. I know I can make it on my own if I try, but I am searching for a great heart to stand me by underneath the African sky. A great heart to stand me by. I am searching for a great heart under the African sky. You might be asking, a quote from an African musician, and I look like royalty today. It is important that I look up the standard and be able to have a conversation with my guest today. My guest today still owes me a book about herself, but today we're not having that conversation. We're having a conversation about a great friend of Dr. Judy Dlamini, a great friend who was the Doctor of Hearts. When I looked at that quote and I thought, how do I open the show today? How do I? But we have to start in the beginning. A little bit about Dr. Judy Dlamini without going deep into it. We still have to have that session, and we will get to talking about Dr. Bongani Mayosi, the Doctor of Hearts.
You know, I guess the best way to describe me is that I'm inspired by great Africans, because I'm a true, proud African who believes that this continent can be the best in the world if we just have the right leadership. So, which is what attracted me to write the story of Bongani Mayosi. I'm a medical doctor. I was doing fourth year when Bongani was, when he arrived at medical school. After that, I worked as a GP. And after that, I became a business person. And then I started writing out of the passion to tell a story. I always say I'm not a writer, I'm just a storyteller. And I'm the channel that is used for people to share their stories. That's how I view myself. So the first book was about conversion of a thesis. And again, it wasn't driven by my skill, but my passion to tell the story of the women that were part of that.
Talking about passion, I don't even know where to start talking about Dr. Bongani Mayosi. But let's talk about Bongani the friend. I think that is one of those chapters that I kept going back to. The person he was, the person who, and I still find it difficult to say that, the person he was, because for me the legacy he has left is just incredible. Let's talk about Bongani the friend.
Yeah, Bongani, when you go to the book and you see the consistency from Nqamakwe, you know, the village that he originally came from. The friends that he had there, the friends at St. John's, the friend at medical school, the friend at UCT, Oxford, everywhere he went, he made friends. What made Bongani stand out for me as a senior when he arrived at medical school, in the book you hear that he sat next to what became the wife, and that they never separated. Yes. And there was just something special about the two of them. And we kept in touch. They got married when they finished medical school, same December when they qualified. And we drove up to Joburg to come to the wedding because they were younger than us, my husband and I, but we just looked up to them. We knew we were going to get a lot out of them, especially Bongani. So Bongani as a friend was it's very rare to find someone who's extremely intelligent. We call them nerds. They tend not to have an EQ. He had IQ and EQ. He had a lot of integrity, and he was dependable. He made time for people. You know, when you read the book, they say he spoke to you as if we were the only thing that mattered at that moment. You know, those are qualities that you hardly ever find in people. So yeah.
I start there because when you have the conversation about this book, it's difficult because everything you can talk about Bongani the husband, Usiznotla tells you that we became friends first. And friendship runs through everything. I mean, he managed to achieve a lot of things. And he had a lot of what we call BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. And those, he achieved a lot of them, but it was through friendship. Everybody he touched speaks about the friendship. You know, when you talk about, for instance, let's have a quick conversation about, and there's no quick conversation about that, but Bongani the researcher.
Wow. Yeah, we actually learned a lot from Bongani.
Yes.
And the beauty, this is why the story had to be told, is that even with his passing, the story continues to be told. If you do research, clinical trials and all that goes with the medical research side of things, you actually have to have these ethics officers where you actually get approval to do the clinical research. They're quite rigorous, and in most of the continent, they didn't have that. But Bongani was deliberate that his research would be a multi-country research. I'm talking about the IMPI trial now. And when they said, well, they haven't got an office, they actually haven't got what it takes to run a clinical trial, he said, okay, I'll make sure that they do. And before he had funding, he did 50% of the work. So that's a lesson to young people, to young researchers, that it takes more than just funding. The passion, the commitment, the hard work, the investment that he put into making sure that Africa actually has solutions for its own problems by doing research themselves on other Africans. So yeah, there are just so many lessons that you learn by just reading about his life journey. And because he was a scientist, it's lost to the men in the streets because they don't know about having an age index of 65. What does that mean, you know? So it was important, therefore, for Kopana and I to actually make Bongani accessible, to share the leadership that he exemplified.
When you describe yourself, you call yourself a storyteller. Now, as a storyteller, how do we start to tell these stories, the important African stories, creating true real-life heroes? I mean, as a person who read constantly and Bongani had to read constantly because to grade that many PhD papers at a go, he had to read constantly. But, you know, there's a quote in the book that is ascribed to him, lift as you rise.
Yeah.
We need to talk about this, Dr. Judy, the sense that, you know, as a leaders, sometimes we do these things for our own sake, for our own fame, for our own whatever, and, you know, how do we grow that spirit, the spirit of Bongani Mayosi, where the selflessness?
You know, by telling the stories as a starting point, one of the contributors to the book, actually, she was the copy editor, and she said, you know, after reading this manuscript, I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to be deliberate about being kind, because I think at the core of who Bongani was, he was very caring and very kind and extremely ambitious. You know, the last time I saw him was beginning of 2018. He passed away in July of that year. And he was still talking about the 10,000 PhDs that he wanted to produce in 10 years. And these PhDs are not just for the sake of it. It's about any nation that innovative, that is prosperous, needs to invest in the research of its people. And for him, it was very important that it's homegrown. It's from the continent, not just South Africa, but from the continent. And I think we need leadership that knows who they are and they live their truth. You know, if you look at the story from the daughters, Vui and Gugu, holidays were in Africa. You know, he was a true African, and he really lifted as he rose. Whoever he touched his life, he made it better because he cared and gave something to them. I mean, the book has no less than 78 contributors. And it was important for Kopano and I that we showcase these legacies, because that's what I call them, you know? Because if you just talk about them, people will be like, it sounds too good to be true. But if we actually become the vessel that opens up and listen to their stories and share their stories with the reader, then it becomes credible. But also, you get to meet them. You get to meet Professor Mashiko Sitsedi. That's his legacy. And so many others that are in the book, including Dr. Kopano Matlomabas.
Maybe let me ask from the perspective of your life in academia at some point in time. How do we carry, you know, Bongani's legacy? Because what Bongani was trying to do was democratize research.
Yeah.
And that I couldn't find any other phrase. Eventually, I settled on that one.
Yeah.
He was making sure, and he has made sure that you democratize research. How do we democratize research and even transform research in itself?
He actually has charted the way for us. Yeah. If you look at Bongani Mayosi Foundation, that is led by the wife, amongst other people, it's actually about that, investing in the next generation of leaders. And also as institutions, we need to fund the up and coming researchers from the continent, you know, because sometimes when it comes to the transformation of the knowledge producers, we don't look in an intersectional lens to say who is producing the most research, who is quoted in the research articles. Because when you do that, you realize that there is a group of people that don't make it to do the research and also to be quoted. So we need to be deliberate as leaders to have an intersectional lens and say, do Black women feature here? Or is it only a certain group that features? And for Bongani, he was quite clear and quite deliberate about making sure that there is representation when it comes to positions and or when it comes to knowledge production through research.
As we do that, there's a level of selflessness that went with Bongani's, but also with intent. The selflessness that is just there, is just, doing it. But there was an intent that directed. I mean, the number of people in the book itself that are contributors that spoke about how Bongani encouraged them to go further, to study, go to the next level. When you thought you were done, now you're going to work and earn some money. Bongani would say, so when is the PhD coming? And all of that. And to me, it's the selflessness. And how do we build leaders like that in Africa?
It starts with each one of us. If Bongani was saying those things but not living it himself, it would have been cheap talk.
Yes.
But here was a young man, and he passed away at 51. To me, that's still young. There is so much that he could still have contributed. But here was a young man who never tired, and he always tackled those issues that were very important in the continent, especially the disease of poverty. One of his sayings is that poverty breaks hearts, because indeed it does. So I think each one of us has to be deliberate about understanding that we have to solve our issues as Africans and find that leader in you. But more than that, make sure that you find and raise other leaders so that there is a multiplier effect in the country and in the continent. Bongani did an amazing job when it came to that.
Knowing that self-preservation tends to afflict a lot of us. Somebody said raising leaders is not a natural process because, people think of their, and how they grow and all of that. But Bongani went beyond that when it came to him and how he worked with, with IMPI and then with different research that he took over.
Yeah.
And he did. Collaborating and coordinating a multi-center research in South Africa alone, with all the universities we have, almost was an impossible task. But he was doing it across the continent.
Yeah. You need to, passion is part of it.
Yes.
Integrity, to gain trust, because if someone comes from South Africa and we are sitting in Mozambique and says, let's do this, he needs to have credibility for you to buy in. And he comes, he doesn't have funding, and he wants to start research. So there was something about Bongani, because of the way he lived his life, because of the track record he started building, even at medical school. He's the only person during our time, I don't know what it is now, that after third year, he said, I actually want to go and do a BSc that focuses on research. And when he qualified cum laude, he had two. He had three, obviously. MPCHB is two, and this other one. How many people do that, And when you look at the book, there's that picture. He was still at medical school, where he was talking in an international conference about diseases of poverty. So his track record gained him the respect. The way he respected people, it was easy for them to trust, and the way he treated people. So it's a whole package. So you can't have one side that is not congruent with your values and expect people to buy into your story. It was easy for him because he was one Bongani. It doesn't matter whether you found him at church, they put together a constitution for some church. So he lived. Every chapter of his life was based on passion, hard work, and excellence. I do think excellence is the other thing, because for a long time we were made to believe, if not even now, that Africanness and excellence are not two sides of the same coin, and they are, So it's up to each one of us then to live that exemplary life, to make people believe that indeed excellence and being African are really two sides of the same coin.
Let's talk about something that, you know, it has always bothered me. Every time you're looking at what they call it, at the need to do research, and especially by African youngsters, because the biggest challenge with it is that you graduate, the family, you know, is expecting you to do certain things and to be able to give back and, you know, build a new legacy in the family, build a new house and all sorts of other things. And yet at the same time, we have this need to create more researchers. You know, this is probably it's not a dichotomy. It's you know, it's probably a quadrichotomy that you could deal with, which has many angles. It's like it's not really you looking at one angle. Bongani was very deliberate about the issue of creating the funding. I mean, right from the beginning when he started his research, but ultimately when he was now trying to get 10,000 PhDs out there. How do we fix that? Because it's something that kept on bothering me as I was like, you know, reading through the book and continuing with that, is that, you know, there's this dichotomy of like, look, I have to go and work because now I have to now raise the family name. And yet at the same time, there's these opportunities. A year or two, or even 3, I would be done. I would be in a better place. But it's 3 years that you see without, you know, that life.
It's a combination of things, Tsepo. And I think it's important that we talk about those issues, because if you look at how he did it, it was collaboration between the funders to fund the research and the people, finding the people. Somewhere in the book, we see Ubanto Luando, right? Who used to recruit for SAICA, which is for the chartered accountants. And he tapped into him and said, I need doctors that we can fund to do research, collaboration, right? We need funders that can fund the research. And if you look at what he called Hamilton Nakin Fund, which is now named after him, it was through getting funding from the private sector. So we are not going to be able to achieve our target without collaboration between the private sector that has got the funds, the philanthropic organizations that have the funds, and the institutions, and even collaboration amongst the institutions. So Bongani's life journey really talks to each of them and the skill of the collaboration to make it happen.
Talking about collaboration, and that tends to be the one area where you know, an indictment of sorts comes up when you're talking about African leaders and collaboration. It's never, you know, I don't know whether, you know, you'd say it would not be in our nature or what to do. It's like everybody wants to be a hero. And that's why I started off with what they call a quotation, you know. Everybody thinks they can make it on their own. And how do we build in Africa? I mean, we've got, how long did it take us? 30 years to sign the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. It still bothers me, this whole thing of this 30 years and this Africa continent. I'm happy it's signed. But collaboration and Africa, and, you know, and then you be in between everything else, you then have, you know, the Francophone states, the Anglophone states, and all sorts of other things that happens in between. How do we break that to be able to make the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement a reality?
You know, it's interesting you say that. I was talking to young, I call them young leaders, you know, the grade 9s to 11 on Africa Day, about the continent of Africa. You know, there is so much research that now comes up in terms of the continent itself and our history of being trailblazers in so many different ways. And I'm sure the history scholars that are watching will have a view. But when I look at the development of language, as you know, human beings started in Africa, And when it comes to the phonemes, that is the units of language, we have the highest number. And as you go away from the continent of Africa, they get less and less. Why do I say that? Because that is a curse and a blessing at the same time. Because we have so many different languages, which makes it difficult for us to communicate amongst themselves within a country.
Within a country.
Right? One of the leaders, and I respect him for that, Julius Nyerere, you know, Swahili is spoken in how many countries? Maybe 9. And I'm told by those that know that Swahili is really an infralingua. It's not even a language of a tribe, but it was a language that was used for trading. But therein lies the wisdom, because the way I view it is that Julius said, President Julius, we need to communicate. One, you do trade through communication, you know? But if I take Zulu and say Zulu is going to be the one, then everyone else will feel why.
Why, yes.
But if you take, as much as we don't like Fanagalo, but something where someone has something in it, it's not glorifying one tribe over others. That's visionary. That's leadership. So what, in my view, we need in the continent, we need visionaries that see beyond themselves. So that's why it matters so much to tell the story of this doctor, researcher, scientist, leader, global leader, because maybe we can take a leaf out of his book, because you need to think beyond here and now. You need to say, and as a result, this is my view, I'm not a historian and I'm not an economist, but when you look at the blogs in the continent, I think the Eastern region has got it better than the others, and I take it back to that visionary of Julius. Yeah.
Now, talking about leadership, and leadership has a level of selflessness. It has a great depth where it's about building legacies. It's about building, you know, as they say, if you want to make money in 3 years, you know, play the stock exchange. If you want to make money in 10 years, plant trees, you know. But if you want to make, you know, grow an economy in 20 years, invest in people. Now, the sense of being able to invest in people, and which was the central core of Bongani Mayosi's life. He was building for years to come. He was building for an Africa. They say the world becomes a better place when men plant trees in whose shade they know they will never sit.
That is, it's actually, no matter how you look at it, he was a godsend. And there aren't many Bongani Mayosi's. Just talk about accountability, a starting point. You know, as leaders, if you are not accountable, why are you leading? You have to be selfless, be there to serve. So I think each one of us has to ask themselves as leaders, because it starts by being leader of self. Why? Why do you lead? Why do you take the position? Because if it's about you, yourself, and your family, then you shouldn't lead, you know? And people, I don't care whether it's 5IR or 6IR, your resource and the greatest resource that any nation has is its people. And Africa has the blessing, I always look at life positively, of youth. We need to invest in them, you know. I'm happy to say that though Bongani is not with us anymore, he is so with us through the young people that he invested in. And those young people, my plea to them, and I know some of them are doing it already, invest it forward, you know, because if we do that, it will have a multiplier effect. So the best way we can honor his memory is by investing in more and more people in the continent of Africa.
as you invest, the challenge comes up. One gets married, one has kids, and I dare say a lot of us are professional successes, but we're family failures, or we don't have the time to be able to invest in our children, in our families, and everything else. But Bongani had it all.
Yeah.
Like I still have no. I couldn't. I was trying to process his ability to be there with the family, be there with his and yet at the same time, be so fully committed to Africa and what do they call it in its future. How maybe from knowing him, how do you think he found that balance?
This is the other trick. And to young people that are listening, the partner, if you choose to have a partner, and it's healthy, whatever partner, you know, because you need a witness to your life, that partner have to an alignment of values with you, one, and you have to listen to them. Because if you read the book, as you did, you'll find that Nonhlanhla had to say, hang on, let's make time for family, right?
Yes.
7 p.m., we should be here having dinner. And then it became lunch on Sunday.
Yes.
If he was left to his own devices, that might not have happened. Are you with me?
Yes.
But because the partner was like, no, it's not going to work this way, and he listened. That's the main thing. So when you do have a partner, listen to them. He made sure that without fail, he would be there at the dinner table for 7 o'clock. And also participate, washing the dishes and what have you. So I believe that part of being a good leader is to also take the needs of your partner into consideration and listen to them.
That is incredible. I jokingly say to a lot of people, some of us, I'd probably drive a Ferrari and live in a small little flat in the middle of something. But because I have to think of the family and I have my accountability partner who keeps me straight on the straight and narrow, then I think more about the world than I think of just...
Your Ferrari.
Yes. Not that I won't drive a Ferrari, one day I will, but it's when I will be rewarding myself for having done some work, that good work. But this is an important issue because I think it's a balance we all struggle with. It's a balance we all struggle with. There's that period when things are just happening. There's just so many things that you have to do. And as I looked at the last weekend myself alone, I had to look at it and stop everything else on Sunday and say, normally on this day, this is what I do. I spend time with the family, so I'm going to do exactly that. When my daughter said she wanted to go and buy a book yesterday, so to me it was like, heaven sent. That's what we're doing. We're buying the book and nothing else. And I have not invested in doing any other thing. I am just going there to go and buy the book. But it is, that brings me to the idea of Bongani the father. Bongani, and this is the bit I say, when you look at Bongani's life, you can't call it a dichotomy. It's just like it's a multiple angle issue, and then you have to look at it in its, and he led from every bit that he did. When Sinonata took up a job and was doing other things, he then invested in taking the kids to school. And finding time to be with them. In as much as he didn't understand why you have to go hiking, but he just loved it because there was time to spend time with what do they call it, with his wife. He has a very, when you tell the story, he had a very dry sense of humor about certain things. When his wife wanted another child, he says, "But why would I write an exam? I've already passed." And I think it's quite an intriguing way of looking at life. But having said that, we've struggled over the years. It's either we raise through need that do the best, if we were to call them that, in being technical and all sorts of other things, but have no ability to relate to anybody.
You know, it's interesting. One of the nephews actually says, I think it's Kwanele, he actually says that Bongani invested in himself.
Yes.
He took the time to understand his strengths and weaknesses and build himself as a person, you know. And I think because of that, we saw a refined Bongani. It wasn't just, yes, he was born a good person. Yes, he was raised well by his sister Nontle and the dad. But also he invested the time. And invested, you know, he believed in God. He prayed every morning. He was one of the elders at church at some stage. So he had this well-rounded life, not by mistake, but deliberately so. So it's the lesson for me is that we need to invest in all aspects of our lives. You know, your spiritual, the body, the mind, everything, because that's what he did. And it worked.
And it worked magically,
Yeah.
I must say. I mean, who would decide, no, I'm going to study an MBA because I'm about to lead a faculty? And being as busy a researcher as he is, an MBA, you know, some people would think, there's madness there. Why would you do that? But he was investing in himself, and he was investing in the skills that he needed to lead. One other thing that I found incredible about the story is that he always charted his own course. I think it's Dr. Schwartz, or was it Prof. Watkins that says that, you know, no matter what advice, I like the way he says it. He says, I'm not a negative person. What I am is I'm extremely cautious.
Yeah.
And every time he said to Bongani, yeah, you can do that. You know, the first time he said to him, well, you can solve one problem, but don't try and do many.
Yeah.
And Bongani went against exactly that.
Yeah.
Now, how does one overcome the fear? The fear of failure?
It's, for me, it's really two things.
Yes.
The passion, you know, the passion that this has to be done, and also believing in yourself. Believing in yourself that I'll put everything I have in this and it will succeed. Positive mind, believing in yourself, and the passion to make it work. If you look at that organization, PASCA, that was really just a name. He changed it. And it's easy for you to say, what made him think he was going to change it? I mean, it was an African society with so many cardiologists. And what makes you think you're going to make the change? Because I will. It's a belief system. You know, in my view, it's a combination of three things. Faith, hope, and love, which is passion. Faith and hope that you never lose. So you combine all that, you work hard, and you are driven by excellence at all times. He failed. You know, he says to Prof. Ngoza, when you send an article, they turn you down, and he's like, they say we are dropping standard, we're going to show them.
Yes.
Right?
That we're lifting the bar.
Exactly. We're lifting the bar, and lift the bar he did.
And you know, like, I like that. It's that self-belief is important, because he would always say to everybody, like, no, lababa no more. They don't know that we are here to be able to change things. And that to me brings me to an important part. And I hope in order they call it in the books those. I always say, after having read a book, I always have to recategorize the book. This is a book about leadership. And as much as it's about what they call it, it's about a very grand story about a very human of humans. that actually spend a lot of time being exactly then, being a human being that is there for others, that lived for others. But it's a story about leadership. Beyond anything else, you find that right in there. Now, when we talk about, and I saw the chapter, and probably in the next iteration we will change it from not Bongani the boss, but Bongani the leader, and all of that. It is incredible how many people speak so greatly about him. And to me, is how do we grow researchers that it doesn't go to their head that they have, a PhD or they have discovered this and that, and yet at the same time have that humility to know that, higher knowledge should humble you. How do we get that right? Because I think in what, as Africa and as what they call as the Mayosi family, they had managed to be able to build a great leader, and everybody who contributed to actually raising Bongani and bringing him up to be the great leader that he was. How do we do that? It's like, it's always, for me, it always bothers me that we don't refine this formula. It's always like it's a once-off. But there's no once-off. I think we need to build more.
We do, and it's possible in my view. And as you say, Bongani was born within a context.
Yes.
If you look at the mother, the way she was deliberate in raising them. If you look at the dad, the way he taught them humility.
Yes.
A doctor's child who actually walks the streets in the village to get to school instead of being in the dad's Land Rover. That's building humility. You will be amongst your people. If you are going to lead, know what it's like to walk on foot to school. So I think it's a lesson, as you say. This is a book about leadership. This is a book about leadership at inception as parents, because that's the first leader you meet, your parents. So as leaders, are we doing that? Are we teaching our kids to be humble? Or are we teaching them to be better than others? Are we teaching them to care? So it's a combination of things. We have this package called Bongani, but it didn't just happen. There was a lot of grooming. There was a lot of molding. And of course, he also invested a lot in himself. And of course, he had support from his partner. It's a combination of things that I think is very important for us to be deliberate about.
Dr. Judy, this is a very important conversation, because when we go back to one of the first few chapters, Bongani the son, and I think there's the bit where he says, well, I became a doctor because he used to be taken to these doctors' gatherings, and he thought, oh, okay, these people dress very well, and
they eat nice food.
They eat nice food, and he thought there might be money in this. But how important is it that we at a very young age, we get our children to be able to come with us on some of these. And I'll say, as Africans, it has always been one of those very funny things where, you don't want to take the kids along to business meetings and all sorts of other things. And but yet at the same time, I think from reading the book, we're doing a great disservice to our children.
Of course.
And how do we build that culture where people actually invest in their children? I mean, you don't hope to create a businessman tomorrow while you leave the child behind when you go to business meetings. I mean, obviously they have to be of the appropriate age.
Yeah, of course. But I think you raise a very important point that it's about inculcating that value system, that ethic from a very young age, because we cannot underestimate the role played by parents in who we become. So I think it's a message again that be with the kids, show them the way by living it, because a lot is said about what you teach them, but the best teacher as a parent to your offspring is leading the way you live your life. So yeah, I think there's so many lessons for parents.
This book has so many insights, and you from every chapter you pick up something new, and as you look through it, when you look at Bongani at a level where, beyond everything else, he believed in the young people of Africa.
Mm.
It is a very, very, the first thought you think about him as a researcher, you think he would have been a very busy man, some guy in a lab coat in a lab in itself. But he believed in getting the youth to do it and work with them to do exactly that. Now, we spoke about this power that Africa holds at the current moment of having the youngest population in the whole globe. How do we make sure that Africa in this current setup does not play the wrong role? Because at the current moment we're exporting our youngsters to everywhere else around the world except actually, and then we struggle with bringing them back.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, actually. The way I see it is that sending them abroad is okay. Learn the skills, but come and plow back. But there must be a back to come to.
Yes.
So we have a responsibility, therefore, to make sure that the leaders that we choose to lead care enough about the continent. They know who they are, because for me, that's very important. If you lead in Africa, but you are not proud to be an African, how are you going to lead us in the right direction? You need to know that I'm African first before I'm anything else, and own that identity and be proud to be that African. Therefore, you can lead us in the right direction for us to be happy with being African. And of course, we need to be accountable. We need to serve as leaders. So I'm very positive that we have a lot of good leaders in the continent. The ones that we write about a lot don't necessarily happen to be the ones that we want to emulate. But if we look, hence the need to tell the beautiful African story that is lived by those leaders that are leading to serve, because we have enough of those, Tsepo. The more we talk about them, the more we write about them, is the more we show the example of what leadership is about.
Yes, we must tell the stories, but I am, maybe from where I see it, I struggle to be able to see the critical mass. Do we have the critical mass?
I believe we do.
Yes.
I believe we do. And what am I basing that on? As I said when I opened, I'm driven by a positive African story, by an African leader that I respect. And I've met quite a few of them. Some have since passed on. It's unfortunate that the spotlight only shines at one person at a time. And depending on the story that you want to tell, you're going to shine it at the person that's messing up. Depending on the position that you hold, you are actually going to be more visible than the people that are doing great work, but they don't have the spotlight. It's my view that in this country, the reason there is still some positivity in spite of the many challenges that we have, it's because of those community leaders that are not the unsung heroes that make it possible for us to still have some pockets of hope. Do we have enough? We need to build more. As I said, it doesn't just happen. You don't just get someone born and without nurturing this tree and making sure that it grows taller than the rest and bears fruit. There's work involved. So the challenge is with parents.
We say it takes a village to raise a child.
Oh, yeah.
But the village is in disarray.
Well, I hear you.
Yes. The village is in disarray.
Yeah.
It's a, and I sit with the worry of, do I build the leaders first and the village will form itself, or do I fix the village as I'm building leaders? Or through building the village, or through fixing the village, I will build leaders?
It's not as bad as it looks and sounds. And I'll tell you why, you know. As you know, I'm a chancellor at Wits.
Yes.
And over the few years that I've been there, I've seen different leaders within the SLC come through, right? And there's positivity there. You have young leaders who care about period poverty, as an example, right? And you think they're okay. They don't have that challenge, but they care about that child that does. And that is our youth. They care. You have young leaders that say, we are going to raise funds because some of us are not able to register because there's debt. So we are not completely lost. However, I keep on saying this because I find that when we look at the whole thing and you see there's a collapse there, there's a collapse there, it's easy to get overwhelmed. And we can't afford to get overwhelmed in this situation. You want to look where you are and say, I have power here. I have access to resources here. What do I do with the power and the resources that I have to build that village? And if you go back, those that are my age, to the days of the UDF, that was what happened, hey? It was
the village was in disarray at that point in time.
It was in disarray, but it was built. Why? Because every person realized, if I don't build it, no one else is going to. We are at that point, in my view, where you need to say, it's a mess, but I can tidy here. And when I tidy here, the next person, you know, they say you have a candle and you light a dark room by lighting the candle next to you. And then before you know it, there's light. We are there.
Incredible message that I feel very strongly that Dr. Bongani Mayosi was lighting candles.
Oh, yeah.
And one PhD at a time.
Oh, yeah.
One research project at a time.
Yeah.
And remember, he existed in the village that was he wasn't out of context. No. He wasn't living in a world where something else happened. He created a world. Now, in this world where we're building, we're rebuilding the village. We are lighting up candles. The role of mentorship. And the value that Bongani brought, what do they call it? It's funny how suddenly when we talk about mentorship, it becomes a very formal thing. Everybody sits up and says, but mentorship is greater than that.
Oh, definitely.
Because when you talk about Bongani the uncle, Bongani, Bongani the father, Bongani the husband, Bongani the researcher, through all of that, the things that knits it together, beyond his smile, it was Bongani the mentor.
Oh, definitely. If you just look at that, Tsepo, they say it wasn't so much that you spent lots of time with him, but those few minutes, he changed your life. He helped you to transform your life, right? What does that mean? You tell him about your aspirations because he asked, and you think he just didn't take note of it. And an email will follow to say, I've spoken to so-and-so, here's the details of that so-and-so. That's mentorship. That is sponsorship. And so that is why we need bulk mentorship, if you like.
I like the idea of bulk mentorship.
Right?
And then when I'm taking away bulk mentorship.
It's bulk mentorship.
Yes.
When you give a child a book, when you give a youngster a book, all these people that are in this book become mentors to that child and to that young person. So I really believe that, and you're right, people think mentorship is this formal thing, you're actually meeting every month.
Yes.
There's that too. But there's also this thing of watching Tsepo, looking at how he runs the organization, looking at how he cares for his family. He's going to exclusive books on a Sunday with his daughter. That's mentorship for someone who's watching, because you're living your life the best way you can, and someone is watching. And they say, I want to be that father who's present. So it comes back to each and every one of us. How are you leading your life?
I like that concept of how does one lead. You know, a self-reflection and introspection that we need to take from, what do they call it, from the process of, you know, what Dr. Bongani Mayosi has built.
Yep.
And ultimately, to me, a leader and a great, what do they call it, and a great trailblazer, if we were to call him that, because I think he had gone beyond being a trailblazer to where now, you know, he was now burning big forest. And just so that he could light up the world properly. And to me, that becomes important, and it's an important conversation. And in essence, me and you, Doctor, can talk until the cows come home. But and I can see they are coming home, and therefore, to me, and today I don't have, as I call it, a question that will tear a hole in the fabric of the universe. I don't have one of those. I am left in awe beyond everything else, is what do they call it, with the story that needs to be told, and the story of leadership and the story of Africa. What is the one thought you have that keeps you awake at night about Africa and how we build it, and the life, and how do we build on the legacy of Dr. Bongani Mayosi?
I'll tell you what I do as a person.
Yes.
As a person, I look at whatever position I find myself, and I'm like, who's the underdog here?
Okay.
And what can I do to change that? I live that, you know. The reason I started Female Academic Leaders Fellowship was just that. That we don't have enough black women in academia who are professors, who are heads of departments, who are deans of faculties. What can you do about that? Galvanize funding, galvanize support, and do that, assist in that. So I think what keeps me awake at night is using everything I have and know to make sure that there is that academic, there is that young person, and not so young, that's given the opportunity. If you listen to what they say, Bongani used to say, is that there's talent everywhere.
Yes.
The differentiator is opportunity. So as leaders, are we making that opportunity accessible to the underdog? For me, that's where the question is. So it's one thing to talk about how accomplished you are as a researcher. You are an A-rated, NRF A-rated researcher. What are you doing about that to build critical mass for this country and the continent? For me, that is the question. For each and every person that has achieved in this country, where is your legacy? Because your legacy, in my view, is not in books. It's in the people that you empower to change the world because you contributed to them being who they are. So yeah, for me, that's the message to all of us.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Judy Dlamini. After her speaking like that, I will not make any fancy comments. All that is left for me is for me to thank her for making the time to come and have this conversation. I am sure it's not the last time I have her here. And I am sure she knows she owes me a book. She knows she owes me a book, and probably the manuscript is ready somewhere. And I look forward to having that book and having that conversation, going in depth into everything else. Find the book, The Doctor of Hearts, a collaboration of many people. And as the doctor said, it's about probably 78 contributors. It's a true cry, a smile, and a dance.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tshepo. I really appreciate this.
Welcome.
Thank you.
From me, Tlol Letebele. Letebele le kwankweetla. Motho wa ro tlhoga kgomo a ja motho. Setlogolo sa mapulana la Matebele. I'd like to thank everyone who contributed in making this possible, and to the team in knowledge management that always goes above and beyond. Thank you. To every other soul that actually touched this program, thank you and good night.
Thank you. I wanted to ululate. I'm like, I was playing myself.